You've cut your carbs way down. Your A1C has dropped 4 points and you're now in the normal range. Your fasting glucose is in the 90s these days. But if you eat a donut or a large baked potato, your glucose soars to 200 or more. So have you really beaten diabetes? Well, we'll take a look at that. One of the criticisms I often get is that even though we can cut our carbs and get our blood glucose down into the normal range, we haven't really beaten diabetes at all. Until we can eat anything we like, any high-carb food, and still have low blood glucose, we're still diabetics. We haven't beaten diabetes, and we're talking nonsense to say that we have. Let me give you an example with a couple of comments I've seen under my videos. One person says, "Okay, let me understand this correctly. David Cox now has an A1C of 4.5, and according to you, David has crushed diabetes. Does that mean David can now eat a Whataburger, large fries, and a large drink without his blood sugar going to the moon? That's an experiment I'd like to see." David obviously would be foolish to do so, but has he really crushed diabetes? Or is that just an exaggeration of yours, just meant to inspire? I ask because my doctor says there's no cure for diabetes, and she made that very clear. Another individual writes, "The doctors told us in a recent diabetes class that there is no cure for diabetes, but you can get out of the danger zone with a low-carb diet and exercise. Everybody seems to agree with that. But when you start your video with the title, 'He Crushed Diabetes,' you seem to be implying that you can get rid of your diabetes altogether with the appropriate lifestyle changes that you discussed. That, however, doesn't correlate with what the doctors told me, that there is no cure for diabetes. This whole notion that you can reverse diabetes that some preach seems to be false hope, if indeed there is no permanent cure for diabetes." So this video is my response to this idea that beating diabetes or crushing diabetes is just not possible. We can simply manage it by a low-carb diet. The notion that we should be able to go back to a so-called normal diet or we've not beaten diabetes is ridiculous in my opinion. And the reason it's ridiculous is that a normal diet is not normal and is not healthy. In America and most of our world today, people are eating differently than they ever have eaten in the history of planet Earth. And we are paying a terrible price for this with diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, and cardiovascular disease. Simply put, we are eating terribly. It's not just that we eat bread. We eat far more of it than ever before with far more forms of bread products. And nearly all of them are made from white flour, which is about the nastiest, the most evil food product ever concocted in the minds of men. Donuts, fruit pies, rolls, bagels, pretzels, various pastos and noodles, chips, tortillas, chapatis, pita bread. The list could go on and on. In the old days, people might make a loaf of bread and have a slice of it with their dinner of meat and a vegetable. That would be about it. Today, we stuff ourselves all day long with bread at every meal, and various bread products as snacks in between every meal. And then there are the cakes and the pies and the candy bars, sodas, fruit juices, sugar-filled energy drinks, Little Debbie snack cakes, and the hugely popular pizza with its thick white bread crust. This diet that we're eating is so far from a natural diet, so far from the food eaten by our ancestors, and is so miserable and unhealthy and wretched that no one could defend it. We are literally poisoning ourselves every day. Our world is overdosing on carbohydrates. So for somebody to suggest that we haven't really beaten diabetes at all unless we can go right back to these very foods that have been slowly killing us seems ludicrous. Let me give you an illustration. Let's imagine a place called Stupidville. Its inhabitants are known as Stupidians, and it has become an entrenched Stupidian custom to have tea every day at 5 p.m. And for some reason, nobody really knows where the custom came from, Every time a stupidian has his or her tea time, they always have a little bottle of arsenic nearby, and they add a few drops of arsenic into their tea. The stupidians have very strong constitutions, and so it doesn't hurt them for many years. And some of them are able to live to be 75 or 80 without being affected too much. But for many of them, those daily cups of tea with arsenic eventually take their toll. As they reach their 40s and 50s, many of them find that their eyesight becomes blurry. They experience tremendous pain in their legs and feet. They find themselves constantly thirsty and constantly needing to urinate. They get infections easily, and sometimes they have to have their legs amputated due to this, and they tend to die much younger than most. The stupidians have created a name for this series of symptoms. They call it Arsenetes. They go to the doctor and they're prescribed various medicines which do seem to help slow down their physical degeneration, but they don't really solve anything. It is a terrible plague upon the land of Stupidville. And then one medical researcher comes up with a fantastic theory. He declares that all the arsenic they've been putting in their tea is causing all of these problems, and if they'll just stop putting arsenic in their tea, they'll be fine. And he convinces a few brave souls to try this. They start having their tea without the arsenic. And sure enough, their symptoms go away and they find themselves healthier, slimmer, and with more energy than they've had in years. They start preaching the message, tea without arsenic. But the leaders of Stupidville are terribly upset. First, they announce that this message is just plain wrong, and rather than cut out the arsenic, what people really need to do to fix things is to double or triple their arsenic intake. But what really irritates them is when they hear the leading researcher in the no arsenic movement declare that these people who have eliminated arsenic from their tea have beaten Arsenetes. Sometimes he even declares they have crushed Arsenetes. They cannot stand to hear such things. They declared loudly in somber voices that the only way you can know if you've really crushed Arsenetes is to be able to drink your tea with arsenic as usual and be fully free from all your symptoms. Well, I think you get my point. To suggest that we must go back to a high-carb, unnatural, unhealthy diet or eat some super sugary food just to prove that we've beaten diabetes is absurd. To beat diabetes, in my opinion, is to get your blood glucose down, to keep your insulin levels near normal, and to be free from the symptoms of diabetes. If you've done that, you win. You have beaten the monster. Okay, I gave you an illustration. Now let me give you a study. I learned of this from the book Protein Power by Drs. Michael and Mary Eads. They share about a study done with a group of Australian Aborigines who had immigrated to America and after a while became diabetics. Dr. O'Day was convinced that if she were to pay for them to return to their native land and live as they had before they came to America, they should improve their diabetes significantly. She found a number of them who were willing to go back to Australia to the bush for a 7-week period and lived like they had lived in the bush country of Australia, essentially as hunter-gatherers, living on mostly protein and fat and eating very few carbs. They were sent to the wilds of Western Australia, and they lived off snails, turtles, crickets, and perhaps an occasional kangaroo they were able to kill, and some wild vegetables, berries, or other plants as they were able to find them. Their blood lipids were carefully checked and recorded before and after the short experiment. Living in America and eating American food, their blood glucose levels averaged around 210, indicating serious diabetes. After 7 weeks in the bush, eating a traditional Aborigine diet, their average blood sugar had dropped to 118, which was pre-diabetic but vastly improved. In America, their insulin levels were quite high, indicating hyperinsulinemia, but now they were cut in half and were very close to normal. Their triglyceride levels plummeted from an average of 354 all the way down to 106. And all of this happened over the space of 7 short weeks. And it wasn't that they were more physically active in Australia. In fact, says Michael Eads, Dr. O'Day determined that the Aborigines were surprisingly less active in the bush than they had been in the cities of America. Dr. O'Day wrote all of the metabolic abnormalities of type 2 diabetes were either greatly improved or completely normalized in a group of diabetic aborigines by a relatively short reversion to a traditional hunter-gatherer lifestyle. So here's a question for you. Were these men and women diabetics or not? Well, that depends on how they ate. If they ate their traditional diet, no, they're not diabetics. If they eat like most Americans eat, then yeah, they're diabetic. And that's how I see myself. Am I diabetic? I don't claim to be so. If I went to most doctors and said, "Doc, I think I may be diabetic. Could you check me out?" And then he gave me an A1C test and it showed 5.3. And then he did a fasting glucose test and it was at 92. He would almost certainly say, "Don't worry, you're clearly not diabetic." And if I were to say, "Doc, you've got to be wrong. I really think I'm diabetic," he'd show me the results of the test and say, "Your results are nowhere near diabetic levels. Just relax, you're fine." Now, if your idea of beating diabetes is to be able to go back to that miserable diet that you ate before and stuff yourself with ice cream, donuts, huge mounds of rice, and so forth, well, my friend, you're living in a dream world. It's not going to happen. But if your idea of beating diabetes is getting your glucose levels near normal, that is not only possible, it is almost certain if you take the right steps and make the necessary lifestyle changes. A rose by any other name smells just as sweet. And when your glucose levels are in line and your insulin levels are normal and you have no diabetic complications or symptoms, well, you can call it whatever you like, and I'll call it what I like. And what I like to call it is beating diabetes. Let me remind you that Benedict and I have scheduled a mission in Nigeria this November, and we would appreciate you remembering us in your prayers. We'll be teaching Christians the fundamentals of the faith, preaching in outdoor evangelistic rallies in the evenings, providing clothes for the local orphans and poor children, and holding a free medical clinic for people who can't afford to go to a doctor or hospital. If you can make a donation to help us cover our budget for this mission, we would appreciate it. There's a link in the description notes below which will take you to a page that shares a little more about this Nigerian outreach and a way to donate toward this mission in the great continent of Africa.